Waka 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 waka.
Welcome to Passion of the Geeks, the show in which two friends and fellow geeks talk about geek and pop culture and everything else we enjoy. I am Pat.
And I'm Greg.
And let's get on with it. So Greg, episode 10, 2 digits.
Woo! Awesome.
It's awesome. Well, we came a long way, didn't we?
Well, I remember our humble origins kind of a long time ago. And yeah, we've come a long way.
Yeah, I think this will be a very interesting episode. Today, Greg and I will explore our gaming origins a little bit, where we come from, a little nostalgia, maybe even answer the age-old question, was gaming better in the past? But before we don our rose-tinted glasses and look at the past, let's stay in the present for a moment longer and look at something that we found out recently. Greg, any intriguing things you made? Findings?
Well, before we move on to recent news, I have some follow-up actually from our last episode.
Oh, great.
I watched Star Trek Lower Decks.
Oh, great. And what's your verdict?
Here's the thing. I thought it was okay. And just what I assumed, that the first episode of a comedy show has so much heavy lifting to do that the comedy, kind of suffers a little bit. And I watched the second episode as well. And I have to admit, it's a little bit better.
Okay.
Not sure if I will stick to the show because, there's so much good stuff around and there's so little time. So I don't know whether or not Star Trek Lower Decks will be worth my time. But I think for what it tries to be, a comedy show set in the Star Trek universe, it's perfectly fine. Maybe it's not exactly my cup of tea, but I think I'm pretty sure that once they kind of find the characters and once they have figured out what kind of jokes work and how the character relationships kind of lend themselves to comedy, I think they're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my impression.
I agree with you. And as I said, it's not as bad as I feared it would be. The thing is, but this is just a Star Trek thing in general at the moment, that it's no longer holding up the old morals the show once had. You can see this in the very first episode where the moral actually is sort of do stick with your friends, duty comes second, which is the complete opposite of what TNG has told us. But I mean, it's not wrong. It's interesting. I haven't watched the second and the third episode yet. I wanted to do that, but sadly, life got in the way.
Yeah, I would say if you have the time, give it a shot. I actually think it's a little bit better than the first one.
Okay, I will do. Thank you. Well then, what did you find?
I did not watch it, but afterwards I looked at some trailers, and obviously I'm talking about the DC Fandom event. I'm not sure if you kind of heard of it. Instead of Comic-Con and all these other events that got cancelled this year, DC decided to do a live streaming event, sharing some exciting and not so exciting news, footages, trailers, interviews, panels, and whatnot of their upcoming properties. Mm-hmm. And I would say kind of in general, what I saw was okay. Kind of, I think they did a good job with kind of the current situation, trying to excite people about their properties. Obviously, what they shared, not everything resonated in the exact same way for me. They talked a little bit about their upcoming computer games. They talked about Gotham Knights. which is kind of the Batman game that's coming up, I think probably next year. And they also shared a little bit of the Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League game that's supposed to come out in 2022. That looked kind of fun. But kind of for me, the main event was obviously James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. They kind of released a little featurette introducing some characters and showing some behind the scenes footage and kind of some footage from the movie as well. And that looked quite interesting. It totally felt like James Gunn. Strangely, it reminded me a lot of his film Super, just with a lot more money. And the heroes or anti-heroes he chose to be part of his Suicide Squad, it's just really crazy. I mean, just one of the characters is Polka Dot Man. And
really?
I mean, here's the thing. This movie probably it's going to cost around $200 million. And there's a character in there called Polka Dot Man. And just for that alone, I have to love it.
Yeah.
And so I'm very, very excited about the Suicide Squad. If it turns out half as good as I think it will be amazing. The other big thing was obviously the first trailer of The Batman. And that looked okay. It didn't blow my mind. It was just a very dark and gritty Batman trailer. I think interesting atmosphere. Lots of critics kind of say that the trailer reminded them of David Fincher doing a Batman movie. And I mean, that sounds okay. Not sure if I need another dark and gritty Batman movie after kind of all the other dark and gritty Batman movies. But it looked okay. Honestly, not overly excited, but it looked perfectly fine. And I think the biggest takeaway was that Colin Farrell, who's supposed to play the Penguin, kind of had makeup on that made him basically unrecognizable. So that was kind of fun. And I think Edward Cullen is doing a great job at playing Batman. I think he has the jawline. So
that's something.
Yeah, perfectly fine there. And obviously the third and probably the biggest thing for many, many people was a trailer for Zack Snyder's Justice League. And I'm sorry, but no.
So you don't have any high hopes for that?
It just looked exactly like you would expect a sequel to Batman vs. Superman to look like.
Okay.
And I think kind of one of the biggest mistakes they made, at least in my opinion, was the whole trailer is scored to Hallelujah.
Oh no.
And I like that song. It's a great song. But in my opinion, every filmmaker should just be allowed to use a song once in his career. And Zack Snyder has already used that song, so he shouldn't be allowed to use it anymore. And it just does not work for me.
Mm-hmm.
The first image you see in the trailer is Darkseid.
Okay.
And he looks just like another CGI big guy who wields a weapon and been there, done that. So I know that many, many people are excited about Justice League, and I'm so happy for them that they get the version they think they deserve. But from what I saw in the trailer, it's gonna be another Batman versus Superman, and I'm not really sure that I need that.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that perhaps the movie does better than the original Justice League would be to keep the tone of the universe they created more consistent. That's maybe something. But other than that, I really don't see what they wanted to do with it. Have they decided whether it's a movie or a miniseries?
They're going to release it as 4-hour-long episodes first.
Oh, okay.
And then they'll put it together as a movie.
A 4-hour movie. Yeah.
Not sure if I want to suffer through that, but... What about you? Anything interesting you found out recently?
Yes. I'm not sure how should I put it. Let's say I felt a great disturbance in the force, as if millions of Oculus VR headset users suddenly cried out in terror and are complaining ever since. Because recently Oculus announced that all future VR technologies and at one point even old devices will require a Facebook account to log in. Of course, this makes a lot of people very angry, but in truth, that wasn't a very surprising move. And I really expected it earlier. So I'm not one of the angry mob, but I do confess that I'm at least slightly annoyed. I mean, some features like the friends list already used the Facebook backbone, and honestly, why not? I think if you have access to a perfectly functioning library that does exactly what you want, and you could easily implement it, there is absolutely no reason to have your product have its own thing. It's that you need to maintain and everything. I think this is okay, but people are, of course, concerned about their privacy. And I'm probably rightfully so. I mean, I assume you will have to manage your Facebook account, so your purchases and maybe what you're currently playing will not be displayed on your wall or whatever it's called in Facebook. But other than that, I mean, if you honestly think that Facebook doesn't get the same VR data from you, no matter whether you use actually a Facebook login or not, then I have some bad news. This is sadly not how the internet works. Even though companies advertise with privacy-related slogans, and I'm sure a lot of these companies do have no interest in your private data, but in the end, everything you do online can be traced back to you. Always. So, I don't know, what do you think about it? You are an Oculus user, you have a Quest. Do you use your Facebook account?
I have a Quest, yeah. Here's the thing, I totally agree with you. Oculus is a Facebook company, and it's just a question of time when they decide that you need to be part of the Facebook ecosystem to participate in the Oculus thing. As you said, if you need your Facebook account for the social features, I mean, that makes perfect sense. Let's be honest, Facebook is a social networking company. They have a social feature in their VR headset. Obviously, you're going to use their Facebook account. Kind of one thing that is a little problem is, I mean, Facebook is, I think, of all these social media companies, Facebook is probably the evil one. Let's be honest. I mean, all the other companies, at least other companies, at least they try to sometimes do the right thing, and Facebook just seems to, not to care. It's just, I mean, if there is an evil incorporated, I think at this point in time, it is probably Facebook. So, with kind of a whole discussion about privacy, it's a big issue because, contrary, let's say, to, I mean, if you use an Apple machine, you need an Apple ID as well.
Sure.
But I think the big difference is if you buy an Apple product, you bought an Apple product. And with Facebook, because most of their products are kind of free, you are the product.
Exactly.
And I think that's what kind of the big outrage, that's what the outrage is about, because it just reminded people that, with Facebook, you are the product. And with the next generation of Oculus hardware, you won't have a choice anymore.
Yeah, and I understand that completely. I mean, it's the same thing. I think alike, because I have bought the Oculus headset and I have bought the software, the games I'm playing on it. It's one thing to give your data in exchange for a service, but it's another thing if you have already paid with your money for that service and now you're additionally giving your data. No, that's completely understandable. It's not that Facebook wouldn't have the data anyway, because that's how all these checks in the background, how these works. And even if you use a different account on your Oculus than on Facebook, they know it's you because it's the same device you're using. And even if companies say, oh, no, these are completely different databases. They don't have all the information. Yeah, they are different databases, but databases need unique identifier. And that's the UUID usually. And this is unique for your device. They can always cross-reference things. So, or even if you use VPNs or stuff, there's always a way to get to your private data if a company really wants. But as I said, most of these companies really are only interested in your telemetry data to make sure your devices work correctly and to give them some sort of pointers what you do with it so they can develop accordingly. I don't think this is such a bad thing. I mean, I need to create a Facebook account because I'm famously not on Facebook.
I was thinking about deleting my Facebook account, honestly.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I heard from several people that Facebook is kind of dead. Is that true?
The younger generation, the younger kids, they're not on Facebook anymore.
Okay.
They're on Instagram.
But isn't that part of Facebook?
It's a Facebook company as well, so Zuckerberg doesn't care.
Okay. Maybe I have to check out Facebook in the future. We will see about that.
Yeah.
But let's stay in the present a little longer. Do you have something new for us that we could check out, Greg?
I had some time to watch some Netflix and some other stuff, and I want to recommend two things today. Kind of staying on topic for today's episode about games, there's a new Netflix documentary called High Score. It's about, video games, video game origins, it starts with an episode about, it basically starts with Space Invaders and then kind of takes you through time, kind of the big developments, the people who were part of these developments. And it tells a few interesting stories. Sometimes it even highlights people who are not part of the kind of main narrative of games, kind of some people you've never heard of who had some very interesting contributions. And it's a good sit. It's you watch it, and it's what I would say comfort food on the TV. You learn a few things about video games. It's entertaining. It's fun. Yeah, it's a really good watch. So I recommend it. High Score on Netflix. You haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it yet, but it sounds interesting. I really wanted to watch it, and then I forgot about it. Thanks for reminding me.
You're an expert on gaming, so you might not actually learn that many new things. But sometimes it's just nice to see the faces to the stories you already know. So that's what I took away from it. And the other thing I watched, I dusted off some old movies, and yesterday I rewatched Tremors. One of my favorite, I wouldn't even say bad movies, it's just one of my favorite trash movies ever. Tremors with Kevin Bacon, where they have basically giant sandworms in a forgotten part of America, and they have to kill those. It's just a funny, cheaply made monster movie. And I just enjoyed it immensely.
You recommended me that movie, and we watched it together. And it's a really awesome movie. It's just cool to watch. And in fact, I liked it so much, I've watched it again later alone. I wouldn't even say it's cheaply made. I think it's adequately made to portray what they wanted to portray. Great cast, cool movie.
Yeah. It just reminded me how much I like those monster movies, and they don't make those anymore, or at least not enough of them. So yeah. Tremors, highly recommend Tremors. What about you? Do you have anything interesting for us to check out?
Also wanted to keep this episode a bit gaming focused on my side, and I thought maybe before we go way back in time, let's have a quick glance at the current state of gaming and an even quicker outlook into the future of gaming. Because I wanted to talk about Horizon Zero Dawn again. We already honored the game in our Generation 8 episode. Check it out if you haven't heard it. And I think there really isn't all that much to add to that, except that the game's biggest flaw has been corrected. It is no longer a PlayStation exclusive. It's now available for PC. And these are great news. As I said before, it's definitely one of the best games of this generation. And I'm really happy that PC gamers can now experience it as well. And the reason I wanted to feature Horizon Zero Dawn again is because, well, of two things. First, despite the awesomeness of having a former PS exclusive title available for PC, it is also a really great marketing tool for Sony. It's like Sony saying, hey, here, have this awesome game. Do you like it? Well, there's more where this came from. If you just buy our shiny new console, you could buy a sequel to this. We know you want it. And I think that's a brilliant idea, really, because, I mean, it's announced, everything. And second, it shows us where we stand in terms of technology. On PC, the original PlayStation Pro graphics are just the PC's medium settings. And even that is marginally better than the PS4 Pro because the PC... on the PC, the game runs with 60 frames instead of 30. Now, but before anyone shouts, yay, PC Master Race, there's some caveats. It is one thing to optimize a PC or a game for a single hardware configuration like a PlayStation. But it's something completely different to get the game to run flawlessly with the millions of different hardware configurations the PC could have. Sure, a lot of people, myself included, don't have any problems at all, but there are those who have troubles getting the game to run correctly. And I mean, you can just tell that the makers of Horizon Zero Dawn are just not as experienced with the handling of complex system environments of PCs. The last updates helped tremendously, but there is still room for improvement for a lot of people. So you kind of can see where this goes, because if you go to ultra settings, it really looks even more phenomenal. And I mean, PlayStation 4 Pro version already looked really, really gorgeous. This is mostly because the PC does not have generations like consoles do, because PCs evolve gradually. There are milestones, of course, for instance, like the real-time rendering NVIDIA introduced 2 years ago or so. I mean, this makes it even harder to program for a PC. But anyway, this is a very short outlook. The game is great. It looks fantastic on PC. And in itself, we can now see what we can expect with the PS5 in graphic fidelity. And I mean, Horizon Zero Dawn is just such an awesome game. So if you don't have a PS4, buy it on PC.
I couldn't put it in any better way. Because, yeah, I mean, as you said, it's definitely a marketing tool. I'm really excited for the second part of that series, and I'm going to buy a PS5 just for that. I'm not a PC gamer, and I'm perfectly happy with graphics that are not ultra settings, but
sure.
Yeah, what I like about console gaming is I don't have to worry whether or not that game will run.
Yeah.
If it says PS4 or if it says PS5 on it, I just know I can put it into my console and it will work, and it will be a good version of how that game is supposed to look. I don't have a PS4 Pro, I just have the normal one. And all the games I played recently, they looked perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Perfectly fine.
I agree.
I mean, yeah, of course, 60 frames per second might be a little bit better, but I don't need it. I'm not that fast anyway. And the thing is, I'm not a competitive gamer, and I think if you're not playing against other players, frame rate is not that big of a deal, I would say.
Yes, it is. And I mean, there's a whole can of worms that can be opened here. I am kind of a fan of 30 frames per second because it gives the games a more cinematic feel. It's less fluid, yes, but it feels more like a movie. And this is cool for a lot of games and maybe not so cool for others. But overall, I enjoy 30 frames per second quite a lot. So, but enough of the present and the near future. Let's travel back in time when gaming was Nintendo hard. The system wars were between Amiga and Atari, and graphics and sounds were so crude, your imagination had to fill in the gaps. So, what are some of your earliest gaming memories, Greg?
Well, I'm going to date myself now. I grew up in the 80s, and yeah, obviously I was familiar with the gaming systems of the 80s. I think more the late 80s, because I think for some reason my parents didn't buy me an Amiga or an Atari or whatever. But what I vividly remember is early in the 80s having those Game & Watches by Nintendo. These little games that you just had one game on it, and part of the screen was painted on. But I like these games, sitting in the car playing them, or in a football camp or in a band camp, playing around with them. I quite enjoyed these, but I think my first real contact with gaming was when I got a Game Boy for Christmas.
Ooh,
and
beautiful.
And to this day, I still remember the Game Boy fondly, because I think looking back at it, for the time it was released, I think it was probably the perfect handheld console. And I think to this day, the simplicity and the look and feel of the Game Boy, I think it's just a brilliant piece of, I would say, design in general, not even industrial design or game design. I think the Game Boy is probably one of those iconic devices from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the games they released with it. Everyone had a Game Boy with Tetris back in the day.
Yeah.
And the second game that almost everyone had was Super Mario Land.
Yeah.
And after that, it differed a little bit. But a couple of months ago, we cleaned the cupboard and we found our old Game Boys. And 2 of them still work.
Yay.
So from time to time, I'm sitting on the couch now and playing old Game Boy games. And yeah, Tetris is still great. Super Mario is still great. And one of my favorite games back then, it was called Lock and Chase. And basically was a Pac-Man clone. It was just Pac-Man, and the thing of the game is you're a bank robber and you have to rob the coins. And the ghosts are policemen. And yeah, it's just a fun game. And one thing that showed me how much I must have played that game, when you finish the game, you get a code that you have to enter during the starting screen. And then you get extra mode, where you get the same levels. They're just a little bit more difficult. And I put the cartridge in, I started the game, and I was able to put that code in because I still remembered that code. And honestly, that was about 30 years ago. So I still remember a password from 30 years ago, which is just nuts.
Yeah, these are the passwords from our childhood. I mean, I can almost remember all of the cheat codes for for the games we had, and I cannot remember the 5 people that are sitting with me in a meeting.
Yeah.
But no, the Game Boy, awesome. The Game Boy really was an awesome device. It was actually outdated when it was released, but that was its strong point because it had such a weak processor. It didn't require a lot of power. So with a set of AA batteries, you could run your Game Boy, I think, for about 20 hours or even more sometimes. It depended if you had sound on or not. But it was really, really an awesome device. What Nintendo was able to do with it, and of course the game developers, was nothing short of amazing. So of course it only had 4 colors, or black and white, but that was enough because your mind filled the gap, as I said before, and it really worked, and it works today.
It's just, those games still work, yeah.
Yeah, seriously. I wasn't such a huge fan of Game & Watches like you were.
Well, I wouldn't say I was a fan. I just remember having fun with them, but yeah.
Yeah, they could be fun for a short while. I had a couple of them. I remember I had the Donkey Kong, which was a dual-screen Game & Watch. And I traded that once against the Donkey Kong Jr. Game, which only had 1 screen, but it was the vastly superior game. But anyway, these were very repetitive. They didn't have a lot of changes because everything was painted on or just predefined figures that you could move. So I didn't have that much fun with them. However, if you're interested I will add a link to our description where I give you a site where you can play all these old Game & Watch games directly in your browser. I don't know how long this will work because it requires Flash. So I guess at the end of this year, this page will be obsolete. But anyway, I will provide the link so you can relive your memories.
Oh, thanks.
Well, my very first gaming memories, beside the Game & Watch, I started gaming when a neighbor of mine got an Atari VCS, or an Atari 2600 as it's better known today. It was a very early console that you plugged into a TV and played with a real joystick. Games came on cartridges that had awesome artwork. The artwork was phenomenal. And in truth, you needed that so you actually understood what these rough pixel representations on the flickering black and white TV screen were supposed to be. But I mean, you can imagine that I tried to visit that neighbor as much as possible, even though games were usually very arcadey and, in my opinion, brutally hard. I mean, it's understandable because they were mostly arcade ports of varying quality. But it was on the Atari VCS where I met such classics as Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Defender, Joust, or Pitfall. Speaking of the arcades, Greg, did you ever have the chance to play these classics, Pac-Man and such, in the arcade, maybe on an actual arcade machine, or did you play them later?
I don't know whether it was an original Pac-Man machine, but I have played Pac-Man on an arcade machine, but I think it was a retrofitted one. So the feeling of playing these games in an arcade, it's actually a feeling that's in a way quite enjoyable. And I would say kind of a game like Pac-Man, all these games, Space Invaders or whatever, they're actually, at least in my opinion, are more suitable to arcades where you have to put in a coin to play it than at home. Because at home you can just try, how many times you want. But in an arcade, kind of where money is an issue, every game just means a little bit more. And that's why you're that more excited when you succeed and that more annoyed when you lose. So I think it's, in a way, it's similar to kind of watching a movie in a cinema with a crowd. It's just, there's a difference to it than just doing it alone at home, where you can stop the movie, do whatever you want, stop the game, do whatever you want. I mean, you can't really stop a game in an arcade. And you can't just start over how many times you want. Well, you can, but you need infinite coins or whatever. So I'm glad I actually played those games on these machines.
Yeah.
Because, it's the real experience. It's different than playing them in a browser or whatever.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, and I not like the point you made, the fact that you play a game and the stakes are higher just because you have put in a coin. I mean, I had the chance to play most of these classics on an original arcade machine, not all of them. And it feels different when you put in a coin. It feels different when you lose or when you want to continue. And I, very similar as you think, I think these games, these early arcade games, they work mostly in the arcade. Because I confess, while I understand the historical value of these games and the importance of the steps game development needed to take in order to progress, these are really not games I like to play anymore. Maybe as a mini game in some real game included. And it pains me a little bit to say this, but I truly think outside of the arcade, these type of games are more or less obsolete. They're not as fun. I mean, they are fun for a while and they're very interesting to play. But after, I would say, 3 levels, you have seen it. There is nothing, the game does not give you anything more. It's always the same. I mean, it's another level. Yes, the maze is slightly different. The ghosts get quicker. But it's still always the same thing that you're doing.
I completely agree with you. What I don't agree is the word obsolete, because I think those games still have value in kind of the same way. And I'm going to say it. I mean, for me, video games, just as movies, just as literature, just as music, is art with a capital A.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even though it was produced to make money, but let's be honest, most art in some way or form is. And these old video games, it's just like paintings by old masters. They're still interesting to look at. You can still get something out of it, kind of a feeling of the time they were produced, the reasons they were made for, and so on and so on. But today, you wouldn't necessarily do those things in exactly the same way, because just as any other art form, the art form of video games has moved on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Mona Lisa is a really good painting. No one is going to paint a Mona Lisa today because, it's not interesting anymore. We do other things today. And I think it's the same for video games. I think they deserve their place in kind of the history of video games. And I think they deserve to be revisited and looked at, maybe even studied.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Obviously, it's not the state of the art of the industry of the art of video games anymore.
Yeah. Well, you're totally right. The word obsolete was the wrong word, certainly, to tell my feelings about that. Yeah. What I just meant is for today's market, it's no longer something that is a viable game. parts of it can be included in a bigger game as a mini game, and it's fun then. Where obsolete maybe works a little bit is my own way how I think about games. I rather play something that has a story, that has a progression, even if the levels have just different backgrounds, but still a sort of a progression. This is how I learned of my gaming, how I wanted my games to be when I got my little Commodore 64, the good old bread box. You had one as well, Greg, didn't you?
Yeah, but a lot later, because basically I inherited an old Commodore 64 when a family we knew kind of decided to throw it away because it was obsolete.
Yeah, there's the word again.
For some reason, I decided I might actually get this one and try it out. And I think I spent about 2 years trying to do stuff with my Commodore 64. And to this day, I remember it as the first time where I was actually interested in how computers work, because it wasn't the family computer. It was just this side project that was sitting around there in a room, and I could basically do with it whatever I wanted because it wasn't a problem if I broke it. So I actually quite enjoy those times. And I think the Commodore had some interesting games.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
The one I remember probably the most is the Great Gianna Sisters.
A classic.
I mean, looking back at it, it's basically a Super Mario clone.
Yeah, it was supposed to be. They wanted to port the Super Mario Bros. To the C64, and they kind of made this demo game, and they showed it to Nintendo, and Nintendo was like, no way, because Nintendo always wanted their brands just to be on their consoles. So, and they thought, okay, we have this engine now, let's do something else. And they created the Great Gianna Sisters with a little bit controversial advertising where they had this whole page with the sisters on it and the words, "The brothers are history," written on it. And of course, Nintendo sued them.
Obviously.
So, basically, everyone who ever played Gianna Sisters played a pirated copy. Because it was very, very, very short and in stores. By the way, Gianna Sisters is a game that we had always discussions about. How do you pronounce that name? Is it Gianna, or is it, like a lot of other people said, Gianna?
I think I say Gianna Sisters.
Yeah, I mean, the cool guys all said Gianna Sisters. But the truth is, and I've learned that years later, my wife told me, actually, this is Italian. The I is silent. So in reality, it would be the Gianna Sisters.
Okay. I think I'm probably not going to relearn that, but... Yeah.
No, I always call it Gianna Sisters. Yeah. So, I had Gianna Sisters on the C64, and later I got an Amiga 500, and I played it there as well. It is a game I hold very dear to me. I liked it personally. It's not just a Mario clone. There are certain things different. I like it a little bit more than the original Super Mario Brothers. But yeah, the later Super Mario Brothers are a lot better, of course. Any other games at the C64 you remember fondly?
I think that's the only one that comes to my mind, actually. I've played others, but that's definitely one I played the most. I think I remember playing some adventure games, but I couldn't give you the names with a gun to my head. It's just, I can remember the password from Lock and Chase that was a couple of years earlier, but I don't remember these games anymore. I don't know what happened during those years.
Yeah, but
I mean, I was around 10 or so. Must have been drugs or something.
I mean, Adventures is a good point because the C64 introduced me to adventures and role-playing games. And that was absolutely these two were my favorite genres. I mean, I love a good action game. There's nothing against it. But usually if I have an action game or a game that allows me to solve puzzles with my mind, I would probably choose the latter. And the C64 is actually the device that shaped me as a gamer, that made me an adventure gamer. The only problem the C64 had is I didn't have full access to it. It wasn't in my room. And this changed the day my mother bought me an Amiga 500. It was such a glorious day. Finally, my own computer in my own room, access 24/7, 365 days a year. Well, actually, my mother made sure I still went to school and got enough sleep. But other than that, the Amiga is really the computer that I have the fondest memories, played the most in my youth. This was really what shaped me. Until I got the Amiga 500 in 1987 or 88, early 88, I think. And in 1990, I already started to kind of go into the PC branch. Started to have a PC on the side. First, it was just the PC on the side. And gradually, the PC overtook the Amiga. And I became more or less a PC gamer. You had a PC as well, Greg, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a family PC as well. And I never had an Amiga. So, yeah, I'm a little bit younger than you. Maybe that's why. But kind of on the PC, I started off with some kind of silly pre-installed games that, weren't really that memorable. And then I'm not sure where I got it anymore. I'm just going to be forever thankful to the person who gave me my first Civilization game and my first LucasArts adventure. And I'm really sorry. I don't know who you are who gave me those games. I'm just going to be forever thankful because Civilization, to this day, one of my favorite game series. I just loved the whole idea of Civilization, and I still think that Civilization 1 was a really good game, and Civilization 2 was probably the best one in the series. And kind of one fun thing about kind of the early days of Civilization is, my first forays into hacking happened with Civilization 1 because you just had to open a hex editor and you could go to your save file and then you could look for a number and then you could change that number and then you suddenly had 30,000 gold. And so those are the things I really remember about kind of PC gaming or spending whole afternoons with friends kind of playing a couple of games of Civilization in a row. And kind of, basically all of them ending in nuclear war.
As they always do.
And
especially Gandhi,
yeah. Or just playing Doom 2 with a friend.
Oh, awesome.
And it's just... And I still know the cheat codes from Doom as well.
Everyone does.
And it's just... Those are just fun memories. And... I don't know if I would be interested in playing Doom again today. Kind of similar to those old arcade games, probably for 15 minutes, but after that you kind of know what it's all about again, and then you move on to the current version of Doom or whatever, or kind of another game. But I think those games back then and kind of the circumstances under which I played them, they just were really charming. And
definitely.
I recently revisited some of those LucasArts adventures on the iPad, and they updated the graphics, and I think kind of text adventure on a tablet is actually a really good version of that. And I recently replayed Day of the Tentacle, which I think back in the day, besides Monkey Island and the Indiana Jones Adventures, was probably my favorite one, because it was it was just really, really crazy. And yeah, and kind of after that, it was real-time strategy games, Command and Conquer. Kind of the first few where you could barely see your soldiers, they were just pixels. And then in the later ones where you could actually, this is a tank. I think I haven't played a real-time strategy game in about 15 to 20 years. But yeah, it was a very, very important part of my childhood.
Yeah.
What about you? What are your games you remember? Or any of the games I mentioned ring a bell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge LucasArts fan. As I said, I love point-and-click adventures. I actually kind of met them on the C64 with their game Labyrinth. That was a game to the movie, where they sort of experimented a little bit with a point-and-click interface that they then made even better with Maniac Mansion, the first part of Day of the Tentacle. I'm a huge fan of LucasArts. I like what they did. Monkey Island 1 is probably still one of my favorite adventures of all time, as is Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis.
That's a good one.
Which, by the way, I really had hoped that they would do this as a movie, but anyway, there was a huge counterpart to LucasArts when it came to graphics adventures, and that was Sierra Online, which was also a very huge adventure gaming factory because they were rolling out adventures after another. And I know that a lot of people actually are not as fond with Sierra Adventures because they had a little bit of a different philosophy how a game should work. They were still, if you play a game, you should be able to lose the game as well, not just able to win, like LucasArts did. And so I really liked about Sierra Adventures that you could die, that you could do wrong things, which wasn't possible in LucasArts Adventures. So I have very fond memories of King's Quest IV, for example, or the Laura Bow series. Sierra was the reason I actually bought a MIDI synthesizer for the PC, a Roland device, so that the MIDI soundtrack would sound even better. I mean, everything sounds better than the PC speaker, but you know, these orchestral feeling, it was wonderful. And one of my favorite adventures still is one of the Sierra games, which is Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, which is an excellent adventure. And I love it when adventures are not trying to be funny. If they have a serious story they're trying to tell, which is something LucasArts did very rarely. They did it, for example, in The Dig, which I love, by the way. But a lot of people didn't like that because it wasn't funny. So, as I said, I'm a huge adventure fan, and this was actually the main reason why I actually switched from the Amiga to the PC, was because of adventures and role-playing games. Because on the Amiga, these adventures had gotten larger and larger, and there were games where you had to juggle 11 discs, and sometimes you would switch 3 or 4 discs just for a single scene, just because you moved from one room to another. And the Amiga, and that was its problem, it wasn't very upgradable. And at one point, the Amiga, even though it was once at the height, it was the best technology had to offer for your home, it gotten obsolete, sadly. I still love it. I still have my Amiga. I still have my C64. I actually have a whole museum of different consoles and computers in my home.
Do they still work?
Probably. I haven't. Most of them are packed away in storage because I don't have the space to use them. I recently used my Amiga again because I played some games with my brother, and it still worked then, but it was a little bit wonky. I think that at one point I would go to someone who knows what to do. I think some of the chips have gone wonky.
I mean, maybe it's just if you clean them and make sure that everything is, well, soldered together.
Yeah.
Maybe that might actually do the trick.
Well, I tried to do that a little bit, and but there's also the thing that the floppy disks, they are magnetic and they sort of lose their data over time. So they get read errors and stuff. And then usually games would crash. And the thing that's made even worse is because I would say about half my software library on the C64 and Amiga are pirated games. I always try to rebuy games I loved as a youth. To kind of, I bought this. I'm okay. I won't get into jail, but I have a limit what I'm willing to spend for old games. I'm not in the sense that of a collector that I just collect whatever I can find. I just collect games that I really truly love. So,
I mean, the way I remember it, at least on a C64, they actually made you pirate the software because you bought something and then you had to make a copy and delete some stuff on that copy because I'd copy the disk twice, and on disk A you had to delete this, on disk 2 you had to delete that, so there's enough space on the disk to do some saving, or if I remember correctly.
There were a couple of games who did that, yeah. But some of the later games, they actually allowed you to make a save disk, a separate save disk, and save on there. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Usually you were better off making a copy because games were immensely expensive. Yeah. They cost the equivalent of about 120 euros back then.
I remember that everything was about as expensive as it is today. So it must have been quite expensive back then.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
And I think a lot of people who had a C64 or an Amiga, they kind of used that as an argument to buy the Amiga and not a console because they said, okay, but then the games would cost nothing. And of course, you could do homework on it.
Of course, yeah. Of course. That's why we had those things. Yeah, because of the homework. Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember that. I remember that. I think I used that lie as well.
Yeah, everyone did. And then you always had to find a better lie because you know that you would need to tell why you needed a better computer to make better homework.
Yeah, and why you needed internet and why you needed a CD burner, and yeah, it's homework.
Well, at least the internet is partially used for homework.
Wasn't back then.
Yeah, not back then. No, but I mean, mention it a little bit. I am a retro gamer. I like to play old games. And I really think that if you're in the right mindset, these older games, they are not worse than they were back then. They are still a lot of fun if you are in the right mindset. And especially I played, because you're talking about Doom 2, recently I played all of the early id Software games, Heretic, Hexen, and so on. And I had a lot of fun. They still work perfectly when you play them today. As I said, you just have to get into the right mindset. You have to let your brain adjust a little bit to the crude graphics and stuff. But then it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, it's art, and a good game 35 years ago is still a good game, just as a good movie from 35 years ago is still a good movie.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you need to get into the right mindset, obviously. You can't have the same expectations as you have of a normal game when it comes to special effects, sound design, music, and everything. But yeah, they still have their charm. They're charming, and they were fun to play back then, so why wouldn't they be fun to play today?
That's right.
And I think most of them, I mean, you don't need 60 plus hours to finish one of these old games, usually. So, yeah, it's not that you decide, I'm going to go to 4-color mode for the next 4 weeks. It's usually a much shorter endeavor than that.
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, you're not required to use the system you knew the game on. Sometimes you can just look around. Maybe the same game is on another system that is visually more appealing to you. So, and especially today with the whole emulation that is going on. Are you using emulators, Greg?
Not that often, no. I'm a Mac user, and when I play games, I usually play them on my PS4 or on my Switch or on the Game Boy or on my retro Super Nintendo or casual games on the iPad. But I don't play that many times with the emulators.
Yeah, I mean, the Switch has become a really great retro console with a lot of emulation going on, and of course Nintendo giving their old games in the Switch Plus,
Nintendo
Plus.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So there's a lot going on there, and I mean you bought the retro Super Nintendo that was released a couple of years ago. 2
years ago, maybe. I don't know.
2 years. Or
what?
Maybe.
Yeah. Time is relative. I don't know.
Time runs. It flies. It's a really great selection of games that they have there. Some of my all-time favorites are there. Final Fantasy VI, for example. So really cool.
Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Link to the Past, yeah. Still my favorite Zelda game. After all, I'm sorry about all the others, but it's still my favorite Zelda.
It's a good game.
It's a really good game. Cool. Other than that, your original Game Boy, your Super Nintendo. Other than that, you're a current generation gamer, aren't you?
Well, my brother, he had a Nintendo 64 that I used as well, and we had a Nintendo Wii. I never had a Nintendo. I just had friends who had one. I never had a Super Nintendo. I just had friends who had one. I played lots of these games. I actually played at friends' houses, which was perfectly fine. But I would say probably I spent most time with my PlayStation 4, at least in the last few years.
Okay, yeah. As I said, I play a lot of retro games, mostly through emulation because it's just more convenient for me. And honestly, a lot of their old controllers aren't as nice to hold than the newer ones, so I enjoy emulation quite a lot.
It's kind of cheating a little bit, isn't it? Playing those old games with modern controllers, isn't it easier?
Yeah, it actually is easier. Honestly, I get a lot further when I use a modern controller when I play NES games. So yeah, it is a little bit of cheating. But
cheater.
I like cheat. I think we have to make another podcast about cheating in games and why I love it so much.
Definitely, definitely.
Well then, Greg, I think we talked a little bit about our gaming origins, how we got into gaming, a little bit what we liked about that. But I think the whole subject is so complex. I think we need at least 3 or 4 or 7 additional episodes.
I think what would be actually quite interesting is a deep dive into kind of maybe a game series or kind of one console we share together. Kind of deep dive into the nuts and bolts or a genre or something.
Yeah,
I like just this free flowing discussion where we just talk about a little bit of everything. But sometimes it might be really interesting to dive in a little bit deeper.
Definitely.
Because you have so many stories to tell about Amigas and stuff like that I know absolutely nothing about. And it's just fascinating to listen to you reminisce about those devices and those games. So looking forward to another episode about this topic.
Yeah, we definitely need to do that one day. Yeah, well then, let's wrap this up. This is it for this week. Please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We are on all major podcasting services and on www.passionofthegeeks.com. Take care, Greg.
Take care, Pat. See you next time.
Game over, man. game over.